Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and I have the pleasure of interviewing somebody very special today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Julie Merberg. I'm the president and founder of Downtown Bookworks, a children's publishing company.
Welcome to our podcast, Julie.
Thank you for having me.
So, would you like to tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about your company, and then just sort of we can go into the books that have raised our attention and brought us here today?
Sure. As I said, the company is called Downtown Bookworks. I started publishing about 9 years ago. I have 4 children. Now aged 9, now aged 11
oh my
to
God.
20. They have a 9-year spread. Yes. But when I first started publishing, they were all kind of in the sweet spot of the books that we're publishing. And I started publishing children's books really because I kept having ideas for books that I couldn't find, that didn't exist. So the company kind of grew out of my own passions and interests and what I thought would be interesting for my own kids, and also really with a mission to keep kids engaged in reading books. I was very, very worried about the advent of smartphones and iPads, and what I saw as a growing obsession with screens and kids taking in their entertainment in a passive way. And I really thought, well, if we make books really cool and engaging and interactive, they'll hopefully continue to read. And also maybe we can make books that are really fun for parents to share with kids and, make them want to sit down and read with their children. So that sort of summarizes the origins of the company and also the direction we went in with our books.
And I think you do very well with that. So just to highlight what the topics of your books are by topics, they are definitely high interest to both parents and children. What are some of the books that you have published? The books that you were looking for that you weren't finding as well.
Okay, so the very first books that I published, actually, I packaged for another publisher, Chronicle Books. When my oldest, who's now 20, was just a baby, I used to take him to museums when I only had one kid and not 4, and could spend a lot of time with him. We used to spend a lot of time walking around New York City where we live and going to museums, and I realized that he loved fine art. And I started looking for books for babies and little kids that featured fine art, and they didn't exist. So the first books that I conceived of that I could not find in the store were what became a series at Chronicle Books called Mini Masters, and they're board books that featured work by fine artists. So the first was A Magical Day with Matisse and In the Garden with Van Gogh, and they're just like sweet little stories that feature the artist's work. And I came up with those because I used to take my oldest, who was 2 or 3 at the time, to a lot of museums, and I realized he loved to look at fine art. And I thought, we're so fortunate. We live in New York City. We have access to all these great museums, but there have got to also be other children who can't go look at original art. So that was the origin of that idea, which then grew into a 10-book series at Chronicle. And then when I launched my own company years later, I created a similar series called Art from the Start, which teaches basic concepts to babies, but using kind of greatest hits fine art. We have a book about feelings. How is Mona Lisa feeling? Which is a book about feelings. We have Mama, Baby, and Other First Words, which is a first words book, and we have Animals and Art.
So this is all really great, and it's great to be able to share art with children and also make it accessible to children. And it'll be things that they remember and they recognize as they grow. What are some other books that have parent appeal? Something that is shareable that with their children, that you think it's appealing for a parent to share with their children?
Yeah, so art was definitely something that I felt passionately about, that I wanted to share with my son. And what we've discovered as a publisher is that, the more we can get parents excited about reading to kids, the more successful we can be, both in terms of having our books bought and also just having them pulled off the shelf over and over again. So we have an entire line with DC Comics, and that came about really because my husband is a huge comic book geek.
Really?
And I remember,
that's cool.
Yes, tremendous. Our third son is named Cal, and his middle name is Lev, so Kal-El, which is Superman's Kryptonian name. Like that.
Wow! So you actually like got that. That actually happened, because I know a lot of parents, and I know Nicolas Cage actually named his son Kal-El, I believe.
We did first. We were like 6 months before Nicolas Cage. My Cal is 14 years old.
Oh, trendsetter!
Yeah, we beat Nicolas Cage with that one.
Well, because I was just going to say, I'm like, I feel like, that's very clever, the way that you named him. Like, Nicolas Cage could be like, I'm just going to name my son Kal-El, and people are going to say, sure. But you did a really good job of working with the pop culture name. That's awesome.
The funniest part of it is not only that my son Cal has like the Superman cowlick, but he's also a total comic book geek. Like, we'll line up at Midtown Comics on a weekly basis to, get autographs from his most favorite illustrators and writers. But he's at LaGuardia High School for fine art, working on his comic book illustrations. So it was sort of perfect that he wound up with that name.
That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah, and kind of perfect that we wound up with an entire line of DC superhero books because of my husband's passion. And like, going home from the hospital with our first child, he turned to me and said, "How long do you think before he can read comic books?" And the light bulb went off, because babies, of course, can't read comic books because they would shred them and eat them, that we could create board books featuring superheroes that would get, the risk of sounding a little bit gendered, dads excited about reading to their kids. Obviously, there are a lot of female mom comic book fans as well, but we really did get great. We got, a lot of parents super excited about sharing that passion with their kids. And so I went to DC. I didn't want to license any kind of movie tie-in or animated series tie-in art. I wanted the classic comic book art that my generation had grown up reading, so that it would feel nostalgic and parents would get excited about that. And,
I also think, if you don't mind, I also just wanted to comment on it, because I have to admit that I own these. I own them myself, and I was one of the people after I saw them. I suggested that my children's department purchase them, and they're always, always, always off the shelves. And I think one of the important things to note just about the classic designs, because every artist has their own style, and, not to disparage, like Alex Ross, for instance, is very, very detailed.
Yes.
And that's fine, and that's good. However,
like painterly, yeah.
Yes. But I guess when you're dealing with really little kids, and I mean like the ages that pick up board books, the classic designs are so simple. There's a lot of primary colors. The expressions are very clear, and I think that really is good for that age as well, who are just starting to figure things out. Like, that's really what pops. It puts the pop in pop culture of the books.
Yeah, they're very poppy and clear and clean, nothing subtle, and very bold and fun to look at. I agree. Like, some of this later on, a lot of the art gets darker or sketchier. So, for a lot of reasons. Also, I just think it's like cool and retro looking. We do a lot of this in museum stores because everything looks so collectible.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally kid friendly.
So some of the concepts in those books, because they're not just so. Talk a little bit about. So you have your superheroes. It's the DC superhero group. Explain some of the concepts that you began to explore in them.
Well, it's funny because the evolution of the DC line really mirrors the evolution of our list. So at first, when I started out, I thought, well, we have to get books that need to be books that will make kids want to hold them and touch them. So our first DC books were my first Superman book and my first Batman book, which were interactive touch and feel books. So you could like pet furry crypto and feel Superman's silky cape and swing Batman on the bat rope. And there's even like a glow in the dark bat signal in the Batman book. So those were our first books, which were interactive and became a huge hit, like across every channel and every age group. And they look great and they make you smile. And then from there, we then introduced Wonder Woman. So we did my first Wonder Woman book. And then we got into the concept business so that we could kind of teach through the lens of superheroes. So we did DC superheroes ABC 1, 2, 3, and colors and shapes and opposites and parts of the body. And then we did like actions and things that grow, things that go, and now feelings and manners. We did even superheroes sleep. And then we got political, like more recently. Then we did my first book of girl power, and that really, really struck a chord. It was very bold visually, and it's like this great looking hot pink book that a lot of people just bought, a lot of grown-ups bought, just like leave out on their shelf. They were not like giving it to their kids or nieces. It was really, just for display purposes.
It's a really cool book. At least the first one, because I know that it doesn't stop there.
It does not stop there. Yeah. So the first book, the idea was, wow, these female superheroes are really, interesting, and they're great role models. And let's just sort of boil down what they do to one line that a 0 to 3-year-old can sit and listen to and understand with a clear visual. And, and like Wonder Woman, for example, has her lasso of truth, so telling the truth is obviously, a virtue that you'd want any child to aspire to.
Right.
And Batgirl's really smart. She reads a lot.
Yes,
so
she does.
So it was like pretty easy to find a bunch of female superheroes who embodied important traits, and we put them into a book. And then from there, we started publishing for a slightly older audience. We realized we'd kind of created this very loyal following, and the kids were getting older, and their parents were looking for, more books for the kids as they grew up. So then we launched this whole big book line that went a little bit deeper into individual superheroes and their origin stories and their superpowers and their tools and their arch enemies, and and also went deeper into concepts. We started publishing activity books. So we have like brain boosting activities. We have awesome activities for superheroes. We have a girl power journal. We have superhero science. We have a joke book, and we have a cookbook. We just wound up using superheroes and that universe. We have a dictionary, as a lens to educate and get kids using their brains and using their hands and thinking creatively.
I think that it's a really good point to make, because I think in the past, like people were so quick to dismiss, or felt like maybe they had to dismiss, a book that had a popular character on it, and that's so completely wrong on so many levels. Number one, it has the interest to get a child reading. Like if you're going to show a child a book with a superhero on it and they're going to, grab that book and they're reading, like that's great. Number two, the superheroes and pop culture, they do have such, their narrative for morals and for concepts and whatever is going on in the world, they sort of hold a mirror to that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started the company, I obviously loved these superheroes and I loved the art and I wanted to make them part of my list, but I really thought that any licensed characters or brands would be a very small part of what we did. I thought we would be much more concept driven. And then as the line developed, I realized we could be both. We could have strong concepts. Right. And we could, use popular characters or brands as a way to get kids excited about really substantive content that they might not otherwise dive into. Like superhero science is the perfect example. A kid who might not pick up a book about natural science and experiments would pick up a book with Superman or Batman on the cover and then winds up learning a ton about physics and speed and chemistry that they wouldn't have known otherwise.
And that's really cool, because there's so many different ways to reach people, and the mythology of superheroes, or just the narrative that pop culture gives us. I mean, when you think about going back to your original, when you started doing things with art, I mean, it kind of lines up when you really think about it. You have these artists that were popular and they brought forth feelings in people, and so you were marrying that with concepts for children. And it's just another part of art, a narrative. Like the Superman story, he wants to do right by his parents. He wants to do right by the world. Wonder Woman, she's, trying to prove herself, and truth is really important to her. And these are things that are universal. And if you marry it with something that's all over and, you can share parent to child, it's such a great, connection for everybody.
Yeah, it's like a tool for engagement, really, and for learning. Like in everything that we publish, there's a learning component. And we try to do it in a way that's, visually beautiful and fun and appealing. So that, if we said, hey, we have this book and you're going to learn a lot when you read it, probably both the parents who would buy and the kids wouldn't be that excited. But if you just buy this, great looking, fun sounding book and you're learning along the way, it's win-win. So that's what we do.
And why shouldn't books be fun? I mean, they should be fun. You should enjoy it. There should be an enjoyment to reading. And just to sort of throw out there, so like some of the books, like the shape ones, you have to identify the shape of around Superman's emblem, and the opposites one, you have like under and over. I mean, it's really good because these are things that kids are supposed to be learning as they grow up, but they're also sharing superheroes with their parents and learning about superheroes, which is a very sweet thing. And so
they're fun. We have our book of supervillains is really a book about right and wrong. So we use the villains as examples of, bad choices.
Yeah.
But it's hilarious. And then we juxtapose them with the superheroes who are always doing good. So it's not at all heavy-handed, but fun way to learn important life lessons.
And some of the villains, I mean, back in like the classic era, now they're dark, probably not appropriate for kids the age of your target audience.
Right. No, you
which
have
is,
to be like
yeah,
really careful
with,
and selective, both in terms of the art and the details that you want to share about
but they were still campy. Like, I feel like back in that time, they were still campy. They were more mischievous and like outrageous and ridiculous, like the old Adam West Batman cartoon where everything was just outlandish and silly.
It's like little water guns.
Yeah,
and, like,
exactly.
Weapon of choice is an umbrella.
Exactly. So so it's a good place to start, but like we're not getting like gritty right away.
Right.
You can build up to that. So getting back to the first book of the girl power ones.
Yes.
So what super hero women have you featured in it? So you featured Wonder Woman and Batgirl, obviously.
Yeah, yes, and Supergirl.
And
you know what? As much as I love the classic art and and the DC characters, one major problem with that era is the void of characters of color.
Yes.
And that's a real problem for us and for life. And so we try to address that by digging a little deeper and finding more obscure characters, which DC did as well. When they launched DC Superhero Girls, they elevated Bumblebee, who's African American, and Katana, who's Japanese.
I know they even gave Amanda Waller, who's usually more of a villainous character. They kind of in Superhero Girls they kind of made her a little bit less. They didn't make her villainous at all. Actually,
I think she's ambiguity.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think she's their principal, and she's generally good. And she's African American. She's an interesting character in general, but that was something when I first saw Superhero Girls. I was like, okay.
And good that they're trying to introduce diversity, and and it's tricky. It's tricky because we had actually unearthed a Native American character, but they wound up not letting us use her. But I found a non-white alien character that we could use. But Bumblebee is really cool. She's a scientist. We love her. We had to create art for her though, because art from that era didn't exist because she didn't exist in the classic era. She's a newer character. So we had to kind of envision what she would look like so that she'd be familiar to girls who knew Bumblebee from like the current iteration of DC Superhero Girls, but that she would, look of the older style. And same with Katana, and we had to kind of sanitize Katana's backstory, which is really gory. A lot of beheading in Katana's original backstory, but she's also really cool. She's someone who worked really, really, really hard to master martial arts, and that kind of perseverance is an admirable skill.
Yes, I do commend you for doing that because not only were a lot of the superhero girls, the women sort of background characters. I mean, you would get you would get a Wonder Woman. You would get a Wonder Woman story, and you'd get Batgirl every now and then, but also she was Commissioner Gordon's daughter and not always prominent. And same thing with Supergirl was is Superman's cousin, and she'd show up sometimes in that classic era. But yeah, there really were no characters of color that were around. So while
and as you said, and prominent women Mera is Aquaman's wife.
So it's like they were defined as their relationship to their male counterparts. So aside, with that, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, with just the superheroes in general, you used a different Green Lantern. Did you use Hal Jordan, or you? Because I think John Stewart is. Did you use John Stewart as a Green Lantern?
We use both.
Both.
We
Okay.
used as much John Stewart as we could get art for.
Because John Stewart is Green Lantern as well, and he's African American. And the first time I learned of him was in the old DC cartoons that they had back in, I believe it was like the late '90s, early 2000s, and he's awesome. So more Bumblebee,
right, and Green
more
Lantern,
Katana.
Right, and Green Lantern does work in that way where they're all like equally important because it's all about the ring. So,
and what they bring to it as well.
Right. And also Cyborg, we elevated, and so did DC. And,
Cyborg is awesome.
Part of Teen Titans.
Yes.
Yeah, Cyborg is also great. So, we just had to kind of dig a little deeper.
But I think I think you're making a good point, though, and a good decision, because superheroes should belong to everybody, and it should be a diverse group, because number one, there is no one type of comic book or superhero fan. It does transcend everything.
Completely transcends. And you want, especially for kids, for grown-ups too, but you just want to have characters who are relatable in every way. Aspirational and relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of this is what the next generation is going to grow up with, and what they are going to remember. So I really give you a round of applause for that, because that was something that I thought was very cool when I started reading your books to my kids.
Thank you.
It was definitely recognized and appreciated. So
we tried. I wish we could have taken it further, but we're still, we have to work within the universe of characters who exist. We couldn't make anything up.
Right.
So we tried, and thank you for recognizing that.
Beyond that, you also have another board book along those lines that I looked up and I found very interesting. A book, first book of feminism.
Yeah, so Girl Power was our toe dip into empowerment and equality. And then I think 2016 just plunged us headlong. And so the next book that I felt compelled to write was and publish my first book of feminism for boys. So I have 4 sons. And I thought, feminism, equality should not be completely on girls' shoulders. Like, boys can be better educated, and what better time than when they're tiny and worship their mothers, and the idea of respecting women, starting with your mom, is a no-brainer. So we published my first book of feminism for boys, which honestly just wrote itself, and I found this great illustrator, Michelle Brummer Everett, who has much younger boys, and whose art is just so simple and childlike and clear that I felt that it really underscored the message of the book, which is that it's just so obvious that boys and girls are equal, and that book also it takes on toxic masculinity and gendered play, the idea that there aren't boy toys and girl toys, or boy jobs and girl jobs. And I did a lot of research to write it, because I didn't want it to be about, what I thought feminism should be, or things that are just important to me, but also about, things that are kind of universally known and understood and held as important. And I learned things like girls do more chores than boys naturally, and that boys expect to be paid for chores. So I addressed that idea, hey, you can make your bed and take out the trash and clean up after yourself, whether girls, I think, just on their own, jump up from dinner by the time they're out of a high chair and, clean up after themselves, and boys not so much. I'm still telling my kids, who are now 11 to 20, hey, don't forget to clear after every single meal.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So I I wrote that book, which really struck a chord, also generated a lot of hate. Like if you look on Amazon, we have 5-star reviews or 1-star reviews from people who are just like pissed off that, the whole idea of feminism and women being empowered, but, other people like really got it.
Or boys being, like the idea of respect, like, being for boys as well. Like that's important.
Boys get it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, just the idea that like this is important for boys to understand because of how they're socialized, and of course they should be respecting women and respecting each other and seeing girls as equals.
And at the same time also like feeling comfortable expressing their emotions.
Yes.
Like that was one of the other bits of research I turned up, was that boys are comfortable expressing anger but not sadness. And that's a problem too.
I think a lot of I know this has like been in the narrative a lot lately. Like Mr. Rogers was very big on that, and there was like a time period where it wasn't cool to be like Mr. Rogers was, like they're like, oh, Mr. Rogers, he was, hokey. But, I think people are starting to kind of come around again and realize that what, like being like a man who was modeling for young children.
Yeah.
And, obviously like the young boys are going to identify with him as well, but like modeling, like we can talk about emotions, we can talk about feelings, we can talk about these topics and, respect enough that children and the children, and little boys can express their emotions outside of anger. I think, people are obviously, because there's going to be a movie about him, but people are really coming back around from that, hardened, cynical time period, and like realizing there was a lot to that and we need more of it.
Yeah. And I think the pendulum has swung, and we're realizing just how important kindness is. Kindness and compassion and empathy. And and I realized that over these last few years I've really kind of taken that bottom up approach to, I don't want to say teaching, because I don't want to give the impression that my books are didactic in any way, but just sort of spreading the idea.
They're fun, but
I think they're fun.
Well
I think
done.
They're sweet, they rhyme, they're engaging. I mean, even my more right-leaning friends have said to me of my feminist books, they said, one friend in particular said, it's not offensive at all. as if feminism or equality could be offensive in any way. But I got what he meant.
Right.
It just makes it like, as I said, like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And, and after my first book of feminism for boys, I realized we really need to publish a book that's for girls on feminism, and that it's a whole different book that, instead of teaching respect and equality and, breaking the myths of toxic masculinity, it's really about sisterhood and empowerment and raising your voice and lifting up others.
Which is another important thing, because a lot of times girls seem to be socialized to cut each other down, or at least that was, I don't want to say ingrained, but somehow, I mean, like Mean Girls became canon.
Mean Girls are a thing. Mean Girls are a thing. I mean, and we all know it. We all
and
use them.
If that's what's being modeled for you, or you're hearing is, oh, she, so and so is so much prettier than so and so, or this and that, and well, first of all, I mean, that kind of makes the focus on like your looks are who you are, but it also, like, girls internalize that as you should be cutting each other down. And I mean, I know that sounds really harsh, but
that looking for flaws. I agree.
Looking for flaws, looking for cracks as well.
And and the point you raised about beauty, also, that's something I didn't even think about or have to touch in the boys' book. I mean, like I live in a boy household. We don't have a comb. Like none of them have mirrors. They wear whatever clothing I bring home for them, or that gets handed down to them from the older brother.
Right.
But in my first book of feminism, the book that's for girls, there's a line that says, "Pretty is not your job, and perfect is not a goal." Because I felt like we needed to de-emphasize beauty and looks as currency. So there are 4 pages about, wear whatever you want to wear and be yourself. And, we made a point of showing girls of all different shapes and sizes. So feminism for girls is very, very different. The vocabulary is very different. Whereas in the boy book, I wanted to talk about, showing feelings other than anger. And, you can be a teacher or a baker. You don't have to be these typically, male and macho professions. Like for girls, we had to talk about, there's a line that says, "Strong is not bossy and smart is not shrill. Embrace your intelligence, drive, and fierce will."
And great language too.
These are very, particular adjectives, and there have been studies that talk about how the same attributes, like the word leader, when you use that word to describe a man, it's always seen as a positive. When you use that word to describe a woman, it's seen as a negative more often, and she is considered bossy. So I think these are important, really important, like big issues that we address in like this little book with simple, bold art, in the hopes that when they're young and open and haven't formed impressions and there's no prejudice, that they can just really absorb these lessons.
I think you are doing wonderful things. And on behalf of moms of boys, geeky moms, and parents in general, not just moms, dads, and parents in general, of any gender, I think, who like comic books, like we owe you a huge debt, because we wanted to read these books to our kids as well. And it was great that somebody took up the initiative to begin making them accessible to both parents and children.
Oh, well, thank you. It just, makes me happy if the books get read. That's all.
And
That's all I care about.
Thank you very much. Do you, before we go, do you have anything that's coming up that you'd like to tell us about?
Actually, we've gone even further in this direction of, what I call my more politicized list. We have this deck called Feminist Flashcards that's coming out right now. That's a great little gift, and also just that idea of something that's fun and engaging, like they're actual games that you can play with these flashcards, and the art is really really hip and cool and fun. But you're learning about a mix of iconic feminists and also more obscure women who've done incredibly impressive things. And then we have a follow-up deck called Activist Flashcards that's coming out in the spring. And a great little book that I'm just finishing up, we'll be going on press with shortly, that's called No, My First Book of Protest. And it profiles 9 amazing activist leaders in civil rights and women's rights. And we have like Greta Thunberg, we talk about climate, we talk about disability rights, in a little board book for kids. That I just think is really cool and fun. And I hope people will check back in and
yes,
see what else we've got going on.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Once again, this is Jessica, and I'm here with
Julie Merberg from Downtown Bookworks. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And I'm going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.